So we've just been on our last trip in the time machine. Now I just want to talk very briefly about who can receive communion, or who is communion for. You might have noticed I've mentioned in each of the places we visited who can receive communion. You might remember in the early church it was quite secretive. You could only be a part of this meal if you had gone through this long initiation process as a catechumen and been baptized. In the Middle Ages, you could only receive communion if you'd been baptized and confirmed, which happened when you were about 13, and so children could not receive, but basically everybody else could. And then after the Reformation, there was a recovery of the need to examine yourself before receiving communion. In some Protestant churches, there was the recovery of what's called church discipline, which is the idea that you can be excluded from the life of the church and from communion if you are not living a life that is consistent with your Christian faith. So in the Book of Common Prayer, we are told that with the permission of the bishop, someone who is a notorious offender, someone who is committing a really blatant and obvious sin and who's not listened to any warnings from anybody else about how they are living, and someone who's bringing dishonour on the church by how they are living, can be excluded from communion. And again, at the time of the Reformation, children can only receive once they have been prepared and been confirmed. And so ordinarily those under 13 are not admitted to communion. And the emphasis in all these places throughout history is that to receive communion you have to be old enough to understand what is happening and to be able to prepare yourself spiritually, to be able to examine the way that you are living before you receive communion. This is, of course, only true of the church in the West, where we haven't been talking about the church in the East, which broke off from the West in the year 1084, and which to this day administers communion even to little babies. But in the 18th century, a little bit on from the time periods we've visited, this idea that only those who've been baptized and who've been prepared can receive communion began to be questioned. And one of the people who questioned this was John Wesley, who you may have heard of. Wesley, although the Methodists follow after him and claim him as their founder, was actually an Anglican all of his life. He didn't leave the Church of England, and actually he had quite high church leanings. But he was one of the leaders of Methodism, which was a part of the evangelical revivals in the 18th century. And Wesley believed, among other people too, that Holy Communion should be open to everyone because it could be a converting ordinance, which means that essentially someone who's not a Christian might receive communion and be converted as a result. Now, in recent years, in the last half a century or so, the question of who can receive communion has again been re-examined in the Church of England, particularly due to our closer relationships with other churches. So who can receive communion in the Church of England today? Well, at this point, if we were doing the Lent course together, I would ask you that question and pause and get you to talk about it in your groups. But as things are, maybe if you can, you'd like to pause the video and think to yourself, what do you think the answer is to that question? Who can receive communion in the Church of England today? Hopefully you've written down what you think. So now I'm going to take you through the official stance according to the canon laws. So firstly, the ordinary route for receiving communion in the Church of England is if you've grown up in the Church of England, you will have been baptized as a baby and confirmed as a young adult, and after being confirmed you can receive communion. So that would normally happen, confirmation normally happens toward the top end of primary school often, and after that you can receive communion. However, due to our closer relationships with other churches, one of the other things that is now true is that if you are from a different church background, if you are a member in good standing of a different denomination that believes in the Trinity, so as long as you have been baptized in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit, then if you're visiting a Church of England church, you are allowed to receive communion. And let's say you were a Baptist and you were baptized as a teenager, and you've now started going to a Church of England church regularly. That means that you can receive communion, but the ideal, according to canon law, is that you will want to be confirmed and become a full member of the Church of England. So although you are allowed to receive communion if you've been baptized in a different church that believes in the Trinity, the ideal, according to the Church of England's policy, is that you should want to be confirmed and become a full member if you are regularly attending and receiving communion in a Church of England church. The final category of people who can receive communion is children who have been prepared for communion before confirmation. And this is a new thing in the Church of England that's happened since 2006. Since 2006, the Church of England has allowed individual parishes, with the permission of their bishop, to admit children who've been baptized to receive communion before being confirmed, if they've had adequate preparation. Now, this isn't universal. This varies from diocese to diocese, depending on your bishop, and from parish to parish. So you may visit other parishes that do not have this. But as I understand it, we practice this in St Mary's. But notice, in all these cases, what is important, clearly, in the eyes of those who've come up with these official policies, is that you have to be able to understand what is happening in communion. It is only for those children who have been prepared for it, who've been through some sessions of preparation, so that they understand what is going on and they can examine themselves in preparation for receiving communion. So you may be surprised by that, because in some ways it seems different to our actual practice. A lot of Church of England churches effectively practice an open table. Anyone who comes forward with their hands out to receive the bread or the wine can receive. And most Church of England clergy won't ask at the rail, are you confirmed, are you baptized, etc. It's just good to know what the official policy is, though we might in practice deviate from that. And it's worth thinking through these issues of who should be able to receive. After all, we ought to be willing always to be reforming our practice in line with what we think the Bible teaches us. So that was a little excursus on who communion is for, who can receive communion.